In mid-October 1944, after the air battles around Formosa, Japanese broadcasters ordered celebrations of a glorious victory, even dropping leaflets that bragged 19 American carriers were sunk. Sailors read the leaflets, then looked at their flight decks still launching aircraft and smiled. The real ledger said Japan lost about 650 planes and crews in the Formosa fighting, while the Third Fleet lost 89 aircraft, 76 inches combat, 13 to operations, and 2 cruisers were damaged but afloat. That isn't rumour. That is arithmetic. Halsey relayed a one-line message up the chain, and Admiral Nimitz released it to the public with a straight face. All Third Fleet ships reported sunk by Radio Tokyo have been salvaged and are retiring in the direction of the enemy. Picture the plot room under red lights, the warm smell of coffee, the low thrum of generators, the sound-powered phones clicking as the words go out. A marine runner grins as he carries the note to the radio shack. Boilers, thrum. Air crews strap in. The fleet does not pause, it sets course for the Philippines. A young radio man taps the line to his buddy. They say we're sunk, tell that to the catapult crew. The enemy's shock is simple. The parade is for a ghost. Our ships are fueled, armed, and closing. American pride isn't bragging here, it's competence married to purpose. We are coming to liberate an ally and cut the enemy's sea lanes in two. Every carrier deck officer knows the next act is written in black water and stars. Boatswains' mates secure lines. Ordnancemen haul 500-pounders on skids. Cooks pass hot coffee through a scuttle to a wet lookout. These tiny gestures add up to national power. Here's the problem to carry forward. How could the enemy be so wrong when the night ahead favours surprise? The answer waits in wind and tide. America brought a tool the enemy lacked, where it mattered most that week. Radar that could see at midnight and aim the first salvo. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf would turn a strait into a weapon, using PT boats as needles, destroyers as stingers, cruisers as scalpels, and 6 battleships as the hammer. It would be a lesson in American values initiative from the deck plates, trust up and down the chain, and technology guided by discipline. The story will only get louder from here. Green starshells will lift, white wakes will cross like claws. And somewhere to the south, men who believed the leaflets will hear a sound they do not expect at night. The steady cadence of radar-directed American broadsides. The broadcast boasts will meet steel, and steel will not blink. That edge turned midnight into our hour. Oldendorf threaded 45 PT boats and 26 destroyers down the south approaches, then placed 6 battle wagons, West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, Pennsylvania across the northern mouth of Surigao Strait. The geometry was ruthless: harass, sting, and then rake. Captain J.G. Coward's picket destroyers took station at dusk, radios dry and calm. In case of surface contact to the southward, I plan to make an immediate torpedo attack and then retire to clear you, he signalled. Permission came back fast. At 2,200, Ensign Peter Gadd of PT 131 watched his radar bloom and led his 3-boat section in at 30 knots. Spray slapped faces. Diesel smoke burned throats. A black wall of sea split under white wakes as green starshells popped. The first Japanese silhouettes lifted out of the dark, long, lean, and hunting. America's plan met them step by step. PT skippers darted in to unmask guns and force evasive turns. Destroyers crouched on the throttles, ready to knife close and loose fish from 7,000 to 8,000 yards. Cruisers waited with turrets trained to rake any ship that broke the line. Behind them, the battle line held beam on to the corridor, directors humming, rangekeepers warm, powder bags stacked like cordwood. Our shells would land first because our directors could see first. A destroyer captain lifted a bullhorn and promised, "I will do my duty to you and for our country." Another officer murmured to his talker, "Steady on, let the plot work." This is American character in motion, initiative from the deck plates, trust in the chain, and technology married to nerve. The enemy expected surprise. Instead, they met a strait turned into a calibrated trap they could not read. Their plots drifted, their ranges wandered, their torpedoes chased phantoms while ours hunted solutions. Sailors on our decks tasted salt and cordite, and felt the deck quiver as secondary batteries tested bearings. A petty officer checked the fuse time with a stub pencil and grinned. The night no longer belonged to the side with more night training. It now belonged to the side that could make night into day on a radar scope. The bridge into what comes next is a single line of steel. 6 battleships, old names with new eyes, waiting to cross the T and end the fight on American terms. Every second that passed favored the patient. Every yard the enemy closed narrowed their choices. When the order came to commence fire, it would sound almost gentle. The result would not be gentle at all. The clock, the tide, and the math were all on our side. Oldendorf's cruisers and destroyers struck first to open the wound. Then the battle line took its place across the strait. Beam to beam, grey giants breathing like factories. West Virginia spoke with uncanny first salvo accuracy, her directors feeding a living stream of range and bearing to guns that answered like metronomes. Destroyer squadron attacks rushed in at 30 knots. Hutchins, Daly, Batch, Beale, Killen's sleek 2000. 100-tonners racing through emerald light, launching torpedoes at 7,000 to 8,000 yards, then peeling out as geysers marched down their wakes. On the heavy ships, turrets trained, elevating in a smooth, almost tender rhythm. Plotters read clean traces. Rangekeepers turned. Fire. Controlman called on. Salvos walked forward across enemy hulls that could not bring enough bow guns to answer. Fire licked up from a battleship's silhouette Yamashiro burning in the night while our line kept its cadence. Here is the setup and reveal. Problem. How do you stop an armoured column at night without losing your own? Answer: layer PT scouts, destroyer torpedo runs, and a radar-directed broadside that rakes lengthwise until the bowguns go quiet. A turret captain checked the solution and pressed the firing key. The ship exhaled flame and steel like a bellows. Below, loaders slammed brass with bleeding knuckles. Above, directors purred. On the bridge, a captain lifted a bullhorn. "We are going into battle. I shall do my duty to you and for our country." The sea flashed white and green and orange. The smell was hot, powder, oil, and rain. The enemy's shock was not just fear. It was time slipping away as bearings held and ranges closed. The T was crossed and held. Their column became a line of targets cut from bow to stern. No guesswork, no flares needed. The American night vision was mathematics, amplified by radar, drilled by months of training and a chain of trust. A yeoman scribbled times in a log and swallowed hard. He knew he was watching the end of an era. On the edges of the killing ground, a PT boat's wake glowed like chalk. A destroyer's stack showed a red seam. Then the gun thunder slackened and the swell spoke louder. The sun was climbing. The page was turning. And just over the horizon, a new fight was forming where tiny ships would face the biggest guns on Earth and say, without drama, that they were staying. Those tiny ships wore nicknames tin cans because their hulls were thin and their hearts were big. They would make smoke, make chaos, and make history. What we proved in the night would be tested in daylight. Could courage buy time against caliber and tonnage until American air power arrived in waves? The answer, written in splashes and fragments and the steady voices of talkers on the sound-powered phones, would echo across the Pacific. Did you know destroyers with thin hulls turned straight into the gunfire of Yamato and heavy cruisers to save slow escort carriers at dawn on 25 October 1944? Off Samar, the first salvos walked toward the jeep carriers, tall plumes straddling decks while bluejackets shouted and grabbed fire hoses. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague launched everything with wings, half-armed planes clawing into grey sky. Then the destroyers Johnston, Howell and Heermann turned toward the flashes. Howell loosed 5 torpedoes and took a 14-inch hit that wrecked an engine and steering gear. The crew hand-fired the rest of the spread and hand-steered the ship against a sea of shell splashes. Lieutenant Maurice F. Green wrote, "With our 10 fish fired, we decided it was time to get the hell out of there." But battleships sat 8,000 yards to port and heavy cruisers 7,000 to starboard. There was no out. Howell kept firing 300 rounds from 2 remaining mounts threading between cold geysers until more than 40 hits finally rolled her under near 0900. Johnston died fighting. Turrets smashed, helm answering as long as cables held. Heermann weaved so close to a cruiser that men saw rivets on the armor belt and felt heat on their faces. Pilots in Avengers and Wildcats attacked with whatever they had, some with depth charges, some with machine gun belts and courage, making the enemy turn away to avoid phantom torpedoes. A downed Japanese aviator told a Coast Guard coxswain later, "Your little ships, they do not run." A rescued Filipino guerrilla murmured, "When your ships stayed, we knew you came to free us." Those minutes were priceless. They let planes circle and bite again and again. They let transports unload and beachmasters keep the lifeline running, flags snapping in the squalls. They broke a perfect formation into a messy chase and cracked the enemy's nerve. Here is the 3rd chapter rhythm again. Problem: can grit beat tonnage? Answer: yes, when grit buys time for a nation that knows how to use it. The human detail is plain: a gun captain's ear bleeding under his headset, a helmsman reading the compass by fingertip, a signalman blinking out a last bearing before a mast goes by the board. On a carrier deck, ordnancemen rearm with hands that won't stop shaking, then slap shoulders and send friends back into the weather. Smoke, rain, and American stubbornness redraw the map. The enemy's shock becomes visible as salvo patterns slow and rudders kick hard. They expected slaughter. They got resistance that felt like a wall. When the tin cans finally fell silent, they had already changed the day. Out past the splashes, the ocean was filling with the sound of more American engines, and the balance of the battle was tilting for good. A seasoned admiral later called it an engrossing study of the haves and the have-nots, the moment Japan's hopes slid downhill toward unconditional surrender as American sea power rolled on. Oilers fueled task groups at sea in lines like highways. Repair ships kept flight decks working, welding under canvas in warm rain. Transports fed the beach. Cargo nets bumped against grey steel, while Higgins boats growled away loaded with rations, shells, and men. Pilots launched, landed, and launched again because Black Hull AO crews kept hoses tight and valves open and log sheets neat. Here's the setup beat. Problem: how do you sustain non-stop combat a world away from home? Answer: build a system only America possessed in 1944. training pipelines for aircrew replacements, depots for spare parts, shipyards that turn damage into steaming ships, and the will to make every rating important. A beachmaster in San Pedro Bay hears the night thunder from Surigao and whispers a prayer for the battle line. A PT crewman wipes salt from his eyes and leans into the throttle to shepherd a convoy through rain and driftwood. A boilermaker in a tender's belly wipes sweat and keeps steam up for the next sortie, while a chaplain writes notes for families he hopes he never has to write. Meanwhile, leaflets still brag that our carriers were sunk, but convoy wakes keep printing long white signatures across the sea. The lie cannot hold its shape in daylight. One number explains the tempo. Before Leyte, the Formosa battles left the enemy down roughly 650 aircraft to our 89. That ratio doesn't just clear the sky, it forces the enemy to fight under a ceiling he can no longer control, and it gives our destroyers, carriers, and transports a margin that compounds hour by hour. Mercy rides with might here. 2. Courtmen share rations with prisoners pulled from rafts. Cooks work through nights to feed aircrews that will fly at dawn. A signal gang rigs lights so weary pilots can spot home through the squalls. The smell of diesel and coffee and hot steel becomes the scent of American endurance. The enemy's shock now lives in logistics. Even after supposed catastrophe, fresh ships appear, fresh aircraft rise, fresh units report on station. This is how free people move mountains across oceans, by making every small job part of a very big promise. And as anchors down in Leyte Gulf and beachheads tighten their grip, one last verdict is forming over the horizon, measured in numbers, nerve, and outcomes that will sound impossible until you see them added up. The closing chord is a stack of facts that sound unreal until you line them up and listen to the rhythm. The last battleship versus battleship fight in history ends with American radar turning midnight into a friend and turning geometry into victory. The charge off Samar shows destroyers and destroyer escorts buying minutes with blood so carriers and troops live. The air ratio from Formosa, about 650 enemy planes down to 89 of ours, explains why our pilots owned the morning after, surviving the dawn, and why enemy nerve wavered whenever American contrails braided the sky. The layered trap at Surigao, 45 PTs, 26 destroyers, 6 battleships, proves design-beating desperation in a way the enemy could not copy or counter in time. A Japanese yeoman later told an American nurse, "We could not see your ships at night, your shells found us anyway." A fireman second class, clothes stiff with salt and smoke, wrote home, "We came as liberators, and we kept coming." Here is the final setup. Problem: did any single day turn the war? Answer: Leyte smashed illusions and revealed the system behind American power. Courage mattered. Steel mattered. But the secret was fusion. Courage, steel, logistics, and mercy, all working at once without drama and without pause. Even in hell, our men saved enemies from the sea, shared rations, and kept faith with who we are. That kindness worked like quiet psychological warfare, convincing doubters that America meant what it said. The enemy felt both edges of American power, overwhelming force and stubborn generosity, and understood the end was coming. Count the beats. A fleet proclaimed sunk, steaming toward the enemy. A night battle solved by radar and training. Small ships daring giants until the giant stumbled. A beachhead fed by a supply chain so deep it could not be starved. Add them, and you get a truth big enough for a nation to carry forward. Free people fight hard, and they fight fair. And when they say they will cross an ocean to keep a promise, they cross it and keep it. The human cost was terrible, the courage ordinary and astonishing, the result decisive. From that week on, the enemy never again believed the sea would save them at night, and the people of the Philippines began to believe again in a dawn without occupation. That is why this story makes Americans proud without empty boasts. It honors the fallen, lifts the living, and proves that strength guided by principle can do the impossible when it has to. The numbers, the names, and the places still ring: Surigao, Samar, West Virginia, Johnston, Howell, Heerman, and they ring with gratitude, because when the hour came, Americans did not hesitate. They aimed true, helped the helpless, and finished the job they had crossed the ocean to do. On 24 October 1944, Task Force 38's air groups clawed through squalls over the Cebuan Sea and found the Japanese center force. F-6F Hellcats speared ahead as fighters. SB-2C Helldivers rolled into steep dives. TBM Avengers came on low with torpedoes slung under their bellies. Pilots reported towering splashes around a battleship so wide it seemed to bend the horizon. Musashi, a monster with armor, measured in feet, not inches. They braved flak that looked like black rain and made repeated runs. Deck crews on the carriers below kept the conveyor moving. Rearm, refuel, relaunch. On some Avengers, men hauled torpedoes with numb hands, then shoved planes forward by main force to the catapults. Radio men in combat information centers called vectors with calm voices and pencil marks that turned the sea into a grid. You can hear the detail. A Hellcat canopy rattling at high speed, a Helldiver's dive brakes screaming, a torpedo plane's engine note dropping as it lines up the wake. The revelation lands with a thud of truth. The question, can air power break a fortress at sea, was answered by method, not magic. Waves of strikes fighters to clear, bombers to crack decks, torpedo planes to flood compartments built damage in layers until the great ship staggered and slowed. Japanese sailors looked up and saw more American planes already forming. The enemy's shock was not one explosion. It was the steady, relentless rhythm. They had come to fight a fleet. They were being dismantled by a system. A downed American pilot pulled from the water later told a corpsman, "I just kept seeing her. Big. Bigger than the pictures. And we kept going back on the carriers. Ordnancemen chalked tallies on bulkheads and kept working. Oilers topped off destroyers through rolling seas, so the screen never thinned. On the horizon, another strike package lifted off. The sky was an American factory line, loud, precise, and merciless. When Musashi finally slipped under, it wasn't a single bullet of fate. It was dozens of bomb and torpedo hits delivered because free people trained hard, trusted their shipmates, and refused to stop when the first blast didn't do it. That is how America solved unsinkable. On 25 October 1944 off Cape Engano, the Northern Force showed bright decks and brave flags, but carried thin air groups, a lure meant to pull American fast carriers away from the invasion beaches. Halsey turned north to hammer them. Essex-class decks became launch mills. Pilots strapped in. Catapult crews saluted. Strike leaders briefed targets by name: Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, Chiyoda. The first waves found the decoys and reported what every planner suspected. Beautiful ships, with not enough planes. The revelation is blunt. The question, can a decoy gut a giant, met an answer written in tonnage and training. America had enough decks, enough fuel, and enough coordination to hit the Northern Force hard, while the rest of the armada kept the landings safe. Bombs walked down carrier decks. Torpedoes opened green mouths along red-lined hulls, radio circuits filled with calm voices. Splash 1. Target burning forward. Turning for home. On the Japanese bridges, signalmen stared at flight decks with too few aircraft to answer. The enemy's shock was seeing their crown jewels hammered from the sky, while American transports still unloaded hundreds of miles away. Back on our ships, a deckhand caught a floating crate and laughed, even their baits empty. Another sailor, eyes red from wind and salt, muttered, "They wanted us to chase." Okay, we chased. Down in a carrier's combat information center, a talker sipped cold coffee and called vectors for returning squadrons, then pivoted to new launches. The machine never stopped. Shipfitters patched catwalks. Aviation machinists' mates swapped engines between sorties. Fleet oilers' ocean gas stations steamed on schedule to keep the tempo up. In the end, the enemy lost 4 carriers they could not replace. America lost time and then took it back with interest. The bait had been swallowed and destroyed, and yet the main meal, the liberation of the Philippines, went on anyway. That is the advantage no decoy can overcome. A nation able to fight in 2 directions at once because it has trained to do exactly that. On the days around Leyte, fleet oilers refueled destroyers on the run. Ammunition ships topped off magazines and repair tenders. Turned damage into steaming ships with a speed that looked like magic and was really planning. On carriers, ordnancemen worked by rote, roll a 500-pounder on a skid, check the fuse, chalk the tail, dog the shackle, then push the plane forward to the catapult and clear the path. Combat information centers fused radar plots, radio bearings, and voice reports so a single controller could vector a squadron to a target cresting the horizon. The revelation lands with a problem to solve. How do you keep planes in the air with no land base, with weather rolling in, and with enemies trying to punch holes in your flight decks? You build a system where every rank has a purpose, and every part has a spare. You train fighter directors to read screens like composers read music. You drill deck crews until the choreography survives rain, darkness, and battle damage. And you put oil, food, and parts where the planes are, not where you wish they were. The human element is a CIC officer who loses his voice and keeps talking, a deck-edge gunner whose hands shake from the last near miss but who thumbs the safety off again, a steward passing coffee to a cold navigator at 0300 because he knows what comes next. The enemy's shock was discovering that even after catastrophic victories claimed by radio, more American planes kept rising. A pilot circled a crippled carrier and watched men in khaki chalk launch marks on a patched deck, then took the signal and roared into the wind. This is what dominance looks like up close. Not symbols, but systems. Not miracles, but men who trust each other to make the next minute count. And it is why, when the morning at Samar began with doom, the afternoon turned into survival, and then into counterattack. The ocean itself seemed to shrug and make room for more takeoffs. American power wasn't just arriving, it was refilling itself in motion. USS Samuel B. Roberts, the Sammy B, was built to hunt submarines, not dual capital ships. Yet on 25 October, when Taffy 3's carriers were trapped under the guns of giants, Sammy B went to full power and turned straight in. Her skipper ordered flank speed and ran so hard the little ship shook. She launched torpedoes at near point blank and opened with her 5-inch gun like a fist in a hurricane. Nearby, the destroyer Johnston had already made her mark under Commander Ernest E. Evans, a man who told his crew in peacetime, "This is going to be a fighting ship." Off, Samar. He proved it. Johnston traded blood for minutes, guns going silent one by one, helm answering until the last cable parted. On Heermann, sailors saw enemy cruisers so close they could make out seams in the armor and the white slashes of bow waves. The revelation is simple and hard. America asks ordinary men to do impossible things and trains them so well that impossible becomes the next task on the list. Gun captains on Sammy B walked shells onto a cruiser's bridge. A loader passed ammo with blistered palms. A signalman blinked a warning to a carrier even as shell bursts blew metal past his face. The enemy's shock was the audacity and the accuracy. Big ships flinched, rudders kicked, salvo rhythms broke as the tin cans bit deep. An American pilot flying top cover later said, "I watched a little ship carve a track across the face of fear." That track bought time. Time brought planes. Planes brought survival. When Sammy B finally went under, she had already helped turn a massacre into a stand. Men from every corner of America had written their names on the day with courage, craft, and the kind of teamwork that makes a small ship fight far above her tonnage. In the quiet after, rafts drifted. Men prayed. A destroyer escort's name began to mean refuse to quit. In Surigao Strait, the Japanese southern force came north at night, confident in torpedoes and tradition. What met them was a ladder of American decisions. PT boats reported contacts. Destroyers launched torpedoes that forced turns and opened the formation. Cruisers crossed angles. Then the battle line fired by radar, raking bows that could not answer with their full broadsides. Fuso and Yamashiro would not leave that darkness intact. Mogami, hurt and burning, would limp away to be finished later. American ships took damage, yes, but the plan held. The revelation is the logic you can draw on a school chalkboard. How do you defeat a force with big guns in a narrow place at night? You let your smallest boats find them. You let your mid-sized ships sting them. Then you let your biggest guns, guided by the only eyes that matter in the dark radar, speak last. The human element here is Admiral Jesse Oldendorf on a quiet bridge, checking positions by red light, trusting destroyer skippers he has never met in person, and whispering a thank you to the gunnery chiefs who made new equipment into certainty. It is a PT skipper wiping spray from his goggles with a salt-stiff glove and calling a bearing that puts shells where they must go. The enemy's shock is the speed with which the trap becomes a verdict. They trained for night. We owned it. They believed surprise. It would save them. We took the surprise away. In the calm that followed, American sailors cleared guns, stacked brass, and wrote times in logs that historians still read to understand why midnight belonged to one flag and not the other. The strait had always been narrow. That night, it felt like a funnel with America at the wide end and destiny at the small. When daylight came, the decision was already made. Our battle wagons stood as proof that old ships with new minds can still decide the fate of fleets. In 3 days, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers in the north, 2 battleships in the south, a super battleship in the center, and multiple heavy cruisers that could not be replaced. America lost ships and brave men, light carrier Princeton, escort carrier Street Low to the first organized kamikaze, and the beloved tin cans that saved a fleet, but the balance of power was never the same again. The revelation lands with the last problem. Could any other nation in 1944 fight 3 major actions at once? Sibuyan, Surigao, and Samar divided by Cape Engano while still unloading an army and keeping the sky full of friendly wings? The answer is what the world saw. A free people's system that fused courage, industry, science, and mercy. Radar and CICs gave our gunners night vision. Fleet oilers and repair ships gave our decks a second life every afternoon. Training pipelines gave our air groups depth, and a moral compass gave our sailors a reason to rescue enemies from rafts even as the battle raged. The human element is a Filipino child waving at a Higgins boat crew pushing through chop with sacks of rice. A Japanese sailor taking a canteen from an American corpsman and drinking with both hands. An Iowa farm kid on a radar scope saying, "Steady, now." The enemy's shock was not only losing ships, it was watching a nation show up everywhere at once and act like it would keep showing up until the promise was kept. Final numbers tell the tale. Carriers gone in the north, battleships lost in the south, cruisers burning in the center, and an invasion still moving forward hour by hour. Add the Formosa prelude, roughly 650 enemy planes, down to 89 of ours, and you see the slope of the line. It points one way. The road from Leyte leads to surrender, not because America wished it, but because America built and bled for it. The last word belongs to a sailor writing home. We came as liberators, and we kept coming. That is the American way, aim true. Help the helpless, finish the job, and at Leyte Gulf it made the impossible look routine.